Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. I was in my kitchen, the smell of freshly brewed coffee lingering in the air, when I heard the knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. The house had been quiet all day. It had been a long week, filled with the usual mundane routines and moments of reflection. I had just finished washing the dishes, my hands still damp as I wiped them dry with a towel. As I glanced at the clock, I thought about my evening plans. Nothing special. I would read a bit, maybe watch some television, and then head to bed early. But when I opened the door, I was met with a face I didn't recognize. "Hi," the man said, offering a polite smile. "I'm Andrew, Sarah's cousin. She's your neighbor." For a moment, I stood there confused. I knew Sarah well enough. She and her family had lived next door for years, but I'd never met Andrew before. And I certainly didn't expect him to show up at my doorstep. "Oh," of course I said, stepping aside to let him in. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize she had family visiting. Come on in." Andrew looked like someone who didn't make a habit of visiting people unannounced. He stood a little awkwardly in the hallway, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his jacket, as if he wasn't quite sure what to do with himself. I couldn't help but notice the way his eyes flicked around the room, taking in the small details of my home. I could tell he was trying to gauge the atmosphere, to figure out how to act in a stranger's house. "You don't mind if I sit down, do you?" he asked, his voice soft but slightly hesitant. "No, of course not," I said, gesturing toward the living room. "Please, make yourself comfortable." As he took a seat on the couch, I noticed the way his eyes lingered on the old photographs on the walls, the familiar family portraits that had been part of the house for years. I could tell he wasn't just looking at the pictures, though. There was a certain curiosity in his gaze, something that made me feel a little self-conscious. I sat across from him, my coffee mug still in my hand, unsure of what to say next. The silence between us hung heavy, and I felt the weight of it pressing down. It wasn't uncomfortable exactly, just a little awkward, like two people who had been thrust together without much preparation. "I didn't mean to interrupt your day," he said, his tone apologetic. "I just thought I'd stop by and say hello while I was in town. Sarah mentioned you a few times, and I thought it'd be nice to meet you." "That's kind of you," I said, managing a smile. "But I must admit, I wasn't expecting company today. It's a nice surprise." We chatted for a few more minutes, the conversation light and polite. He told me a bit about his life in the city, how he was visiting family for a few days and trying to reconnect with old acquaintances. I could tell he was a little more comfortable now, his words flowing more easily as we discussed the usual pleasantries. But there was something else beneath the surface. A tension, subtle but noticeable, that seemed to hang in the air between us. I couldn't quite place it, but it made my skin tingle in a way I wasn't sure how to interpret. After a while I asked, "So, what made you come by today? I mean, other than just visiting?" He hesitated for a moment, his fingers tapping gently on the armrest of the couch as he looked down at the floor. "Well," he began, "I guess I just wanted to talk. Sometimes it's nice to get away from everything and have a real conversation with someone who isn't caught up in all the stuff I'm usually around." It's hard to explain. There was something in his voice, something raw and honest, that made me pause. I wasn't used to people being so open with me, especially not on a first meeting. It was refreshing, in a way, but also a little disarming. "I can understand that," I said quietly. "It's not easy to find someone you can talk to. Most people have their own agendas, you know." He nodded, his eyes meeting mine for the first time since he had entered. "Exactly. And I'm sorry if I'm being too forward, But I guess I just needed to be around someone who wasn't judging me or making assumptions about my life. Someone who understood what it's like to feel lost sometimes. I felt a small pang in my chest at his words. It wasn't often that someone would express such vulnerability, especially not so openly. And yet, here was Andrew, a stranger, pouring out a little of his heart to me. "Sometimes I think we all feel lost," I said, my voice soft. "It's part of life, I suppose. But the trick is finding your way through it, even if it takes time." Andrew's eyes lingered on me for a moment, and I could see the weight of his thoughts behind them. There was more he wanted to say, more that he wasn't sure he could put into words. "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" he asked, his voice quieter now, as if he feared he might be crossing some invisible line. I wasn't sure how to respond. It had been years since I'd really looked back at my own life and the things I'd gone through. But somehow, I felt like Andrew wasn't just asking out of curiosity. He was searching for something, some kind of connection that would make him feel less alone in the world. "Life has its ups and downs, like everyone else's," I said carefully. "But we get through it. We have to." The words hummed between us, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. But in that silence, something shifted. I wasn't sure what it was, but I could feel it. The subtle change in the atmosphere, the unspoken understanding that had passed between us. And in that moment, I realized that perhaps this unexpected visit from my neighbor's cousin wasn't just a simple stop for small talk. Maybe, just maybe, it was something more. Something deeper. The sound of a car door slamming outside broke the silence, and I quickly glanced out the window. "It looks like Sarah's home," I said, standing up. "Would you like some more coffee before you head back?" Andrew nodded, standing up as well. "That sounds great." As I turned to the kitchen, I couldn't shake the feeling that this visit had been the beginning of something I hadn't anticipated, something that, despite its quiet start, would change the course of my day, and perhaps my life, more than I realized. And as I poured more coffee into our mugs, I wondered just how much one unexpected visit could unravel the things I thought I knew about myself. When I turned back to hand him his coffee, the door to the living room opened behind me, and Sarah walked in, smiling warmly at both of us. But there was a glint in her eye, a knowing look that I couldn't quite understand. "Hello, Andrew," she said cheerfully. "I see you've made yourself at home." Andrew gave a small laugh, though it sounded more nervous than he probably intended. "I guess I have. I hope I'm not interrupting." "No, of course not," Sarah replied, her tone light but with an edge of something else. Something that made me pause. "I'm just glad you two are getting to know each other." There was something in the way Sarah spoke that made me wonder if she knew more than she was letting on. Had she been expecting this? Had she known that Andrew would stop by? I couldn't be sure, but in that moment I felt a strange sense of unease settle in my chest. Something about the whole situation suddenly felt more complicated than I had first realized. The next few minutes passed in a blur of polite conversation. Sarah settled onto the armchair, and Andrew and I both took our places at the coffee table. For the first time, I felt a certain tension in the air, a subtle shift I couldn't ignore. There was a weight to the silence between us that hadn't been there before. Maybe it was the unexpectedness of Andrew's visit, or maybe it was the way Sarah seemed to observe us more closely than usual, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. "So, how have you been, Sarah?" I asked, trying to break the silence and steer the conversation back to familiar ground. "I've been good," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Busy with work, you know how it is. But it's nice to see Andrew here. It's been a while since we've had a chance to catch up." Andrew nodded, his gaze flicking toward me, but there was something almost guarded about his expression now. as if he were carefully choosing his words. I couldn't help but wonder if my earlier conversation with him had made him uncomfortable. "You know," Sarah continued, "Andrew's been traveling a lot lately. He's been trying to figure out what he wants to do with his life." Her words seemed casual, but I could hear the underlying tone of concern in her voice. She clearly cared for her cousin, but there was something about the way she said it that hinted at something more, something unresolved. "I've been figuring that out for a while," Andrew said with a half smile, his fingers absently tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm just running in circles." His words hung in the air, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy. There was something raw in his vulnerability, something that made him seem both distant and close at the same time. I could see that he was struggling, though he was trying hard to keep it hidden behind a facade of casual indifference. "I think we all feel that way sometimes," I said quietly. "It's easy to get lost, especially when you're trying to find your place in the world." Andrew looked at me then, and for a moment I saw something shift in his eyes. A flicker of recognition, maybe? It was like he saw something in me, something he hadn't expected. Or maybe I was just projecting my own emotions onto him. But in that brief moment, the connection between us deepened, and I could feel a subtle pull toward him that I hadn't anticipated. "I think you're right," he said softly. "It's just hard to admit that sometimes." The conversation drifted after that, as we chatted about trivial things, Sarah's work, the weather, a few random stories about family and old friends. But as I sat there, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to Andrew's visit than simple small talk. There was an unspoken tension between us, one that I couldn't quite put into words, and I wasn't sure if it was something I should be worried about or embrace. When the conversation finally died down, Sarah stood up and stretched. "Well, I'm going to head to bed," she said, her voice suddenly light and cheerful again. "It's getting late, and I have an early meeting tomorrow. I'll let you two keep talking." I watched as she left the room, and the moment the door clicked shut behind her, the atmosphere shifted. It was like the air had changed, becoming thicker and heavier. It was just Andrew and me now, and there was an intensity between us that hadn't been there before. I didn't know what to say, so I stayed silent, my heart pounding in my chest. There was something about him, something about the way he looked at me, the way he spoke, that made me feel exposed, vulnerable, like he could see right through me. "I didn't mean to make things awkward," Andrew said, his voice low, almost hesitant. He leaned back in his seat, his fingers still tracing the rim of his cup, but his eyes were focused on mine. "I guess I've been feeling like I don't know where I'm going, and it's hard to talk to people about it. But you seem like someone who understands. I don't know why, but I just felt like I could talk to you." His words struck something deep within me. I didn't know why, but I felt a rush of warmth at his confession. It wasn't often that someone opened up to me like this, especially not so quickly, and I realized that his vulnerability had an odd effect on me. It was like I was being pulled into his world, and for a moment, the world outside of this room didn't exist. "You don't have to apologize," I said softly, trying to calm the rapid beat of my heart. "I think sometimes we just need someone to listen, someone who won't judge us." Andrew looked at me with something that resembled relief, but there was still a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Maybe I just need to stop pretending that I have everything figured out." "None of us really have it all figured out," I replied. "We just try to make the best of what we have." There was a long pause as we sat in silence, and I realized that the moment had stretched far beyond anything I had expected. There was something about Andrew, something I couldn't quite understand, that made me feel like I was sharing in a secret, one that neither of us had been prepared for. "I guess that's why I came over," he said suddenly, his voice a little more hesitant than before. to figure things out, I don't know, to talk, maybe to find some kind of clarity. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of connection with him. Sometimes all we need is a little clarity. I didn't know where this conversation was leading, but in that moment I realized that it wasn't about the small talk anymore. It wasn't about the polite gestures or the casual pleasantries. It was about something deeper, something unspoken. And I couldn't help but wonder how much more there was to uncover. The night stretched on, and the air between us was thick with unspoken words. As I sat across from Andrew, the quiet hum of the house seemed to echo in my ears, amplifying the tension that had settled into the room. My mind raced with questions I wasn't sure I could ask, yet I felt the need to say something, anything, to break the heavy silence. But every time I opened my mouth, the words felt inadequate, like I was afraid of shattering the delicate moment we had created. Andrew shifted slightly in his seat, his eyes still on me, though he didn't seem to know what to say next either. I could tell he was lost in his thoughts, as if he was still processing everything he had just said. And in some strange way, so was I. "I'm glad you came over," I finally said, my voice quieter than I intended. I knew it wasn't what you expected either, but sometimes talking can help more than we realize. Andrew nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving mine. I didn't think it would be like this. I thought I'd just stop by, say hi, and maybe get some advice. But now I'm not sure what I was really looking for. His honesty struck me. It wasn't often that people admitted when they didn't know what they were seeking. Most of the time, we all pretended to have everything figured out, to be sure of our next step. But Andrew had just laid bare the truth, that he was searching for something, even if he didn't fully understand what it was yet. "Sometimes we just need to feel heard," I said softly, "to know we're not alone in our struggles." Andrew leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, as he stared down at the floor for a moment, his hands fidgeting with the coffee cup. "Yeah, I guess that's it. I've been feeling pretty isolated lately. It's like everyone else around me has their lives together, and I'm just stuck. I'm not sure how to move forward." There was a rawness to his words that made my chest tighten. I could feel his pain, his confusion, and in some way, it mirrored the emotions I had buried deep inside myself. There were days when I, too, felt like I was stuck, like I was just going through the motions without any real direction. I shifted in my seat, crossing my arms, trying to find the right words to offer comfort. But I realized that sometimes words weren't enough. Sometimes the best thing we could do was simply be present. "Life can be hard like that," I said, my voice steady but soft. "It's easy to feel like you're not where you thought you'd be. But that doesn't mean you're failing. It just means you're still figuring things out. And that's okay." Andrew's eyes met mine again, and this time there was something different in his gaze. It wasn't just the uncertainty or confusion anymore. It was a quiet gratitude, like he had found something he hadn't been expecting. Something he needed. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know I needed to hear that, but I did. I smiled gently, feeling the warmth of his words settle into my heart. There was a comfort in knowing that I had offered something of value, even if it was just a moment of understanding. In that moment, the connection between us grew stronger, deeper, as if the walls we had both put up were slowly beginning to crumble. We sat in silence for a few minutes, the only sound being the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. It was a peaceful silence, though, not the kind that felt heavy or awkward. It was the kind of silence that allowed space for reflection, for the unspoken emotions that lingered between us. Eventually, Andrew stood up, stretching his arms above his head before letting out a quiet sigh. "I should probably get going. I don't want to overstay my welcome." I stood as well, a sense of reluctance filling me. The conversation had taken a turn I hadn't expected, and though I knew it was time for him to leave, I didn't want it to end just yet. There was something about the way we had connected, something about the way he had opened up to me, that made me feel like I wasn't ready to let it go. "You don't have to leave so soon," I said, offering him a soft smile. "I'm glad you came over. You're always welcome here." Andrew hesitated for a moment, looking as though he was debating whether to stay longer or not. He took a deep breath and nodded. "I appreciate that. Maybe we'll have more time next time to really talk." I smiled, though I knew the next time might not come for a while. Life had a way of pulling us in different directions, and I wasn't sure when or if Andrew would return. But in that moment, I was content to know that we had shared something real, something meaningful, something that wasn't just a passing conversation, but a moment of connection that would stay with me for a long time. As Andrew turned to leave, I followed him to the door. He paused for a moment, looking back at me, his expression soft. "Thanks again," he said, his voice quiet. "I needed this more than you know." I nodded, a lump in my throat. "Take care of yourself, Andrew." With one final glance, he stepped out the door, leaving me standing in the quiet of my home, the echoes of our conversation still lingering in the air. I closed the door gently behind him, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. As I turned back into the house, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had just transpired. What started as a simple visit had turned into something far more significant. I had learned more about myself in the span of an hour than I had in weeks, and I realized that sometimes the most unexpected encounters were the ones that taught us the most about who we were and who we could be. As I made my way to the kitchen, I stopped for a moment to look out the window. The stars were visible in the night sky, their soft glow reflecting off the surface of the quiet street. I felt a sense of peace settle over me, knowing that despite all the confusion and uncertainty in life, there was always room for growth, for connection, for understanding. And perhaps, just perhaps, this visit from my neighbor's cousin had been the beginning of something new, something that would leave a lasting impression on both of us. When I woke the next morning, I didn't know exactly what to expect. Would I see Andrew again? Would our paths cross in the future? And if they did, would I be ready for whatever came next? I couldn't answer any of those questions yet, but as the day unfolded, I knew one thing for certain. My life, in that brief exchange, had changed. And in the quiet of my own home, I realized that sometimes the most unexpected visitors brought more than just small talk. They brought with them the possibility of change, of connection, and of rediscovering parts of ourselves we hadn't known we were looking for. And I couldn't help but wonder what more might be waiting just around the corner. The days following Andrew's visit felt different. It wasn't just the shift in the air between us, but the way I viewed the world around me. The quiet routine of my life had taken on new layers, and for the first time in a long while, I found myself questioning what I had been waiting for all this time. Was it just the simple comforts of life, or was there more that I had been missing? I went through the motions of my days, work, errands, cleaning, but everything felt infused with a subtle awareness. Every conversation, every interaction seemed to hold more meaning than it had before. The weight of Andrew's words, his vulnerability, his quiet confession about feeling lost, it stayed with me. It was like a seed planted deep within me, one I hadn't realized I needed to tend to until now. One evening, a few days after his visit, I found myself sitting in my favorite chair by the window, the soft evening light casting long shadows on the floor. I was reading a book, but my mind kept drifting, returning to that quiet conversation we had shared. I wondered if Andrew had found the clarity he was looking for, or if he, like me, was still navigating the labyrinth of life, one uncertain step at a time. Just then, I heard the familiar sound of a knock on my door. I stood up slowly, wondering who it could be this time. When I opened it, there stood Andrew, his face a mixture of hesitation and determination. "Hi," he said softly, his hands shoved into the pockets of his jacket. "Can we talk?" I could feel a moment hanging in the air between us, a tension I had sensed before but couldn't fully understand. There was something unspoken in his presence now, something deeper than what we had shared on that first night. He wasn't just here for small talk anymore. This time, it felt like there was more to the story. "Of course," I replied, stepping aside to let him in. "Come on in. What's on your mind?" As he entered the living room, I noticed how much more at ease he seemed this time. His posture was more open, less guarded, but there was still a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, something that told me he was still wrestling with the thoughts that had brought him here. "I've been thinking a lot since we talked last," Andrew began, sitting down on the couch. "About what I said. About everything, really. I've been trying to make sense of me, and I think I need to keep talking." I nodded, sitting across from him, allowing the silence to stretch between us for a moment. There was no rush this time. I didn't feel the need to fill the space with words. Sometimes it felt like the silence spoke louder than anything else. "You know," I said after a while, "sometimes we're afraid to be honest with ourselves. We hide behind distractions or fears because we don't want to face what's really inside. But it's only when we confront those things that we can move forward." Andrew looked at me, his gaze softening as if he were hearing those words for the first time. "I think I've been hiding without even realizing it. I've spent so much time trying to please other people, trying to live up to their expectations, that I forgot who I was along the way." His words hit me harder than I expected. I understood that feeling all too well. There had been times in my own life when I had done the same, putting the needs and expectations of others ahead of my own. And it had left me feeling empty, lost. But somewhere along the way, I had started to rediscover myself. "I get it," I said softly. "We all have moments like that. It's part of being human, but it's never too late to change direction, to start living for yourself." Andrew's eyes met mine again, and there was a depth to his look, an unspoken understanding that passed between us. He wasn't just talking about his life anymore. He was sharing something deeper, something more intimate. He was revealing pieces of himself that had been hidden for far too long. "I don't know if I'm ready to change everything all at once," he admitted, his voice filled with uncertainty. "But I think I'm ready to start. To stop pretending I have it all together when I don't." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me at his honesty. Starting is the hardest part. But once you do, you'll realize that you don't need to have everything figured out all at once. You just need to take it one step at a time. For a moment, we sat in silence again, but this time it felt more comfortable, less strained. There was a sense of understanding that had grown between us, something that hadn't been there when we first met. And it was in this silence that I realized something important, not just about Andrew, but about myself, too. We don't always need grand moments of clarity. Sometimes it's the small, quiet conversations that make all the difference, the ones where we can be open, honest, and vulnerable. And in that vulnerability, we find connection. We find understanding, and we find the strength to move forward. "I think you're right," Andrew said finally, his voice softer now. "It's all about the small steps, and maybe, for the first time in a while, I feel like I can take those steps." I smiled, standing up and walking over to the kitchen. "I'm glad to hear that. Do you want some coffee?" He nodded, and I turned to start making it. As I worked, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace settle over me. I had never expected this visit to lead to something so meaningful, but in the space of a few days, both of our lives had been touched by this unexpected connection. As I poured the coffee and handed him a cup, I realized that sometimes the most important moments in our lives aren't the big, dramatic events. They're the quiet ones, the ones that happen when we least expect them. And it's in those moments that we find the strength to change, to grow, and to rediscover the parts of ourselves we thought we had lost. We spent the rest of the evening talking about our lives, our struggles, our dreams, and as the night wore on, I realized that, for the first time in a long time, I was no longer alone in my journey. There was someone who understood, someone who had shared a piece of my world, and in return, had given me a glimpse into his. When he finally left that evening, it wasn't with the same hesitance as before. There was a quiet sense of mutual respect between us now, something that hadn't been there when he first arrived, and I couldn't help but smile as I closed the door behind him. I had no idea where this connection would take us, but I knew one thing for sure. Life had a way of surprising us when we least expected it, and sometimes those surprises were exactly what we needed to grow. As I sat down to reflect on the evening, I couldn't help but feel a sense of contentment. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I was open to whatever came next. And that, in itself, was enough to make me believe that maybe, just maybe, I had found something I had been searching for all along. And it all started with a visit from my neighbor's cousin, who brought more than just small talk.